Leigh Jenkins and Heather Reed will present today on the recent book club selection, The First Political Order, How Sex Shapes Governance and National Security Worldwide, written by Valerie Hudson, Donna Bowen, and Perpetual Nielsen. Global history records an astonishing variety of forms of social organizations, yet almost universally, males subordinate females. How does the relationship between men and women shape the wider political order? The book, The First Political Order, is a groundbreaking demonstration that the persistent and systematic subordination of women underlies all other institutions with wide-ranging implications for global security and development. So it's my pleasure to introduce Leigh and Heather.
I did not choose that music.
Neither did I, for that matter.
Oh, there we go.
Where now?
Do you want the wireless instead?
No. Feel too much like a stand-up comedian if I have that. Okay.
Well, let's see if we can.
See if we can do it. And I have paper notes because if I put it on my phone, I can't see it. So I'm old. Yes, The First Political Order. My goal today is to have you read this book. All right. I tried it out on book club. They wouldn't buy it. So I'm being punished. They said, we don't want to read it, so you have to present on it. So here I am. And it's wonderful. I love this book because when I read it, it actually changed the way I looked at the whole world, which is a big thing to say, you know, and it's not even a cult or anything. So it explains things in a different way. We're used to, I think as Americans, we're used to seeing democratic countries and non-democratic countries and third world countries and first world countries. And this book points out that that is not really how countries are decided. The good news for everyone sitting here is this whole subordination of women thing doesn't really apply to the United States. So we're trying to understand other countries today. So all you guys, it's okay, it's not you. All right. Next slide. Ba-ching. He's not watching. He's not watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. The U.S. loves to intervene in other countries, as we know, and they always presume that what other countries want is democracy. And they may not be right. That might not be the source of the problem. When we take a list of, in the book they took 176 different countries, 2-to-1 non-democracies outnumber democracies. So we're kind of fighting a losing battle here. There's a lot of countries doing it a different way. And hopefully I'll get to a couple stories about why and how we misunderstand what's going on. Let's do the next slide, please. In most of the misunderstood countries, the population is divided into clans and kinship groups rather than under a central government. So the kinship groups provide the rule of law, they provide security for each other, and they also produce outgroups. So the outgroups may be, you know, the Hutus and the Tutsis, or the different classes in India, or, I'll do write them down because I can't think, the Sunnis and the Shias. You have in-groups, you have out-groups, and you stick with your clan and you hate the other guy. Ah, wait a minute, maybe it is about the United States. I don't know. And so these groups protect each other, and they are the rule of law to their family. Unfortunately, next slide, women are also considered an outgroup to these clans. The clans are the guys, they get together, they make the rules, and the women are subordinate, right? They're also considered property. So when you buy property, you can do what you want. You can buy a car and you can drive it really badly, or you can drive it really well. And unfortunately, most of the women are subjected to a lot of violence and a lot of other yucky things, which we shall talk about. They don't have any rights, and yeah. So, and in the law, under the law, they're also mistreated. For example, in many countries, you probably all know this, sorry, you're too smart for me. Men are not punished for rape or violence against women. It's not a crime. If you took that to court, you'd be laughed out of court. Outside of the family, if someone is raped by somebody outside of the family, it's considered a property crime against whoever owns the woman. So against the husband or against the father. And if it was a single woman and she is raped, then the rapist is expected to marry her because, you know, you broke it, you bought it. Right? Sorry. If you doubt me, read the Bible. It's in there. And if the woman refuses to marry her rapist, then she will be killed. Or what happens more often is she will commit suicide, which happens in a lot of these countries. Good old Bible. Yeah. Right. In a study done in India, they interviewed a bunch of people. 43% of men that they interviewed said that in their lifetime they had raped somebody. And that's how common this kind of abuse is. I notice in the news, you know, a lot of people who are victims of rape in India are now coming forward and pressing charges, and they're trying to change the laws that affect that. And, you know, good for them. That's terrific. All right. There's an interesting quote. There's one that I like. It was, whatever cruelties men visit upon other men, they have first tested and refined on women. And usually in the family. Okay, next one. All right, locker room talk. The men in these kinship groups get together and socialize together as a group. And one of the things they do is they talk down about women. And when you get a bunch of guys together and they all talk down about women, then it becomes the status quo. Yes, women must be terrible. We really don't care how we treat them. We're allowed to beat them because he beats them, you know, and so does he, so I can too. That's why locker room talk is dangerous. And it's dangerous in this country too. We should never be in a situation where we get together and talk down about the other gender. It's not good. And I think women do it to a little extent, but, you know, we're punching up. They're punching down. All right, next slide. Patrilocal marriages. This means that when a woman marries, and this poor woman here is being carried to her husband's family, where she will now live. This removes her from all of her birth family, from her friends, from her mom, from any other women she may have had as a support group. So that's not a good thing. Ask me, I moved to the United States. Yeah. So she's separated from that support. And when she gets to the other family, she's not considered family there either. And particularly mothers-in-law are notorious for mistreating these women when they come into the family. And they do it because that sides them with their sons. And the more you side with the guy, the more power you have. So the mothers-in-law have probably been just waiting for this opportunity to have someone to pick on so that they don't get the brunt of all the bad treatment. Because she will only be with her birth family, you know, while she's growing up, and then she's going to leave and she's not going to be a member of that family anymore, taking care of a girl in some of these situations is considered watering a plant in somebody else's garden. And so they tend not to have very good health care, they don't get good food. That is, if they're allowed to live. And as we know, a lot of girl children are killed either through abortion or infanticide, or neglect by not getting the food and the health care that they need. And as for educating them, what a waste, right? Because that's all that education is going to go to the other family. They're even, again, refer to the Bible, they're even eliminated from genealogies, family genealogies, because they're not that important. They're not really part of the family. Just picked up someone else's paper. All right. All right. Next slide. Early marriage, child marriage. Why would you marry a girl off at such a terrible age? You know, she might be 9, she might be 3, and you can marry her off. Well, she's expensive to feed, you know, and she's going to go somewhere else anyway. So the sooner you can get her out of your family, the more money you can save, the more money and effort you can save. Also, and we're going to get to this in another slide, there's a thing called bride price, which means that when you do marry your daughter off to somebody else, the man pays you for her, like he's buying a possession. And if you have sons who need to generate some money so they can marry, if you marry off your daughter, you can get that bride price, give it to your son, and he can buy a woman. So you kind of keep the money flowing. It's good to know women are good for something. All right, we can get some money into the family. Also, if she's still a child, if she's 7 years old, chances are she's still sexually pure. And that's really, really important in some of these places. And so rather than take chances by letting her grow up into a teenager, marry her off while she's still pure. Okay. The other reason that men are often favored, why people would rather have sons than daughters, is that most of these countries don't have Social Security. So when you're old and you can't work anymore, someone has to support you. They have to look after you. And that's because the men make the money and the women are not in that equation. Then you want to have a lot of sons. And you don't need a lot of daughters. So in addition to getting rid of some of your daughters, the fertility rates are really high. Because the more sons you have, the more Social Security you have for when you're old. So one of the things the government can do to prevent female infanticide, which doesn't seem to make any sense at all, is to provide pensions for the elderly. And a lot of these problems become less important. Okay, next one. Property laws. In India, 13% of women own property, like farmland, but 75% of women work on farms. So they work, but they don't own the land that they're working on. The kinship group owns it. But as a non-owner, they don't qualify for subsidies. They don't qualify for government programs. In India, there's a seed program where the government will provide seeds for people who own properties. Women don't qualify for any of that because they don't own their property. So that puts them at another disadvantage. All right. And it keeps them dependent upon their husbands. If they divorce, if you just can't stand it anymore, and women decide to get divorced, the children will go with the father. They will not go with the mother, and she will never see her children again, and she may be thrown out. If he dies, the property goes to his brother or his father, and the widows are often thrown out. Ruth and Naomi in the Bible, remember? They had to leave because they didn't have any property. Okay. Right. Well, she's a property too, so she may revert to the brother as well. She may be expected to marry her husband's brother, no matter who he is, even if she doesn't like him. Okay, next slide. Bride price. Bride price is what a man will pay to buy a woman, to buy his wife. Okay? It's a little more than taking her out for lunch. It can be very, very expensive, and they have to save up for years and years and years in some cases until they're quite old for marriage. All right. So what happens is there are a lot of young men who want to be married, but they can't afford it yet. They have to keep earning money to keep earning the bride price. And what happens with radical groups? Well, and the Syrian army, for example, ISIS, the Taliban, they say if you join us, we will pay your bride price.
Oh, wow.
And you can have a wife. And if you're real lucky, we'll give you a wife. And it won't cost you anything. And so they're joining up. We think that they get online and they see ISIS propaganda and they get radicalized and they join. They're not. They want to be married. And they can't afford to be. And these guys promise them what they can't afford, which is pretty tragic. And so we go over and we say, oh, let's get rid of the Taliban. And the young men are saying, no, stop. They're paying our bride prices. Please don't get rid of the Taliban. But as Americans, we find that hard to understand. And the military goes over and tries to understand this. There was a story told by a translator in Afghanistan, and one of these army guys went over, and he thought he would interview a bunch of young men in Afghanistan to see what they really wanted. And you know what answer he wanted. He wanted them to say, "We want democracy." And they didn't. They said, "We want to be married." And the military guy goes, "Well, yeah, everyone wants that. But what do you really want?" And what they really wanted was to be married. And that went right over their heads. They didn't get that. And that's why they're still the Taliban. They're still ISIS. They act as family. They offer these men what they can't get by themselves. During the Egyptian Revolution in 2011, there was all the chanting, in Cairo. One of the things that was being chanted was, "We want to marry." Unfortunately, they didn't do it in English, so we didn't get that. But they were hoping that the government could enact laws to decrease bride price, because they can. I mean, they can pass a law that says, your bride price can't be more than $2,000. And as a law, that's great. Then it can, people can get married. But it has a way of sort of escalating. If this person pays just a little bit more, then this family is going to want to pay more again. And without laws, it can get really out of control. Okay, next slide. Dowry. Dowry is the other way. Dowry is where you pay a guy to get rid of your daughter. Right? This is why gold prices are so high, because gold in India is your dowry. And you see these Indian wives, with all their gold ornaments. That is their dowry. That is the wealth that they bring to their new family.
Oh, wow.
Now you can look at that differently, right? This is another reason that people want to get rid of their daughters. Dowries can be expensive. And, they're losing the daughter anyway. It's not like their family is going to benefit from having her married. So if you don't have so many daughters, that makes life a little bit easier. I've been in religion my whole life until recently. And I always think of, I don't know if you know that section at the end of Proverbs about the ideal woman, and she sews and she weaves and she does all sorts of things. And the killer line in that is, she's wonderful, her price is above rubies. That's bride price that they're talking about. They're not talking about, isn't she wonderful? She's like a diamond. They're like, no, we'd have to pay a lot for her. She's an expensive piece of property. All right. Next one, polygamy, which I believe the proper term is polygyny, which, who cares, right? All right. So polygamy, what happens is where there is bride price, the guys who get all the money get all the wives. So the rich dudes, doesn't remind me of anybody. But so they have a lot of money, they collect all these women. This is bad for women. They don't usually like this. And they're not usually well treated. And the other wives will mistreat them too, because you get this sort of jealousy thing going on. It's also not good for the other men in the community. In Utah, the FLDS people have what are called the Lost Boys, which means that the leaders of the church have used up, they've sucked up all the women, so they've got them on their side, and there's all these boys left over with no partners, and so they're thrown out into the wide world. And so that's not good for anybody, except maybe the rich guys, I don't know. In China, they call these guys bare branches, which means they'll never marry, they'll never have children, they'll never produce offspring. In India, 12% of the men are surplus, right? In China, 15%.
Damn.
So you got 12% of young men, or 15% of them, out there being a danger to society. I don't know what young men do. But they have found that, that's about right. They have found that for every 1% of excess men in the community, you get a 3.7% increase in property and violent crime. So if you got a 15% excess of men, you might have trouble. And I think I missed, there's one more slide that we should have jumped to. There's the bare branches. They're all sitting on the fence there, looking into the future. But they might also join a terrorist group, because the terrorist group might promise them a wife. It's pretty appealing. Who knew men wanted to get married so much? Good for them. Right? Okay, next slide. Cousin marriage, not a good idea. Yep, not just genetically. Genetically, it's a tragedy. I worked in special education, and we would often say, "Don't marry your cousin," when some kids would come in. I went to Jordan for a trip and met a family where cousin marriage had been going on for generations, and the children will never marry. They were too genetically affected by cousin marriages. You really can't do that. The other thing about cousin marriages, it's often encouraged because if you have, like your brother has a kid and you have a kid and you do this deal and you go, okay, let's trade, right? I got a daughter and a son, you got a daughter and a son. Let's do that, and then there won't be any dowry, there won't be any bride price to worry about keep within the family. This happens, which that sounds like a good idea, but the rules say if this woman divorces her husband, because this was a fair trade, this one has to too. Doesn't matter if she's happy as a clam, got all kinds of kids, she has to divorce too. If this one dies, this one may be killed to even it up. All right? Because it's within the family, it's got to be fair above all else. Not compassionate, but fair. All right, next slide. And these are just a few points. I hate points on slides. I'm so sorry. But I only did one, right? Change must come from within. And when we're talking about women, there's a lot of them, It must come from women demanding change and people advocating for them. Okay. This second one was a big surprise for me. Dictators can be more effective than democratically elected governments. Because dictators are real bossy. And if they say there's a rule, bride price has a cap, you're not allowed to marry your cousin, then it will happen. Because they have a lot of power and they have the power to enforce. But again, what the United States, from my experience, what I've seen is they come in, the first thing they do is take the dictator away and they put some guy there who's, no one really knows him, he's not really part of the kinship groups, he's democratically elected, and they don't have the power. They don't have the power to change their culture. You look at China, they have dictators and they can change things. They can do a one-child policy because they have the power to do that. You just have to hope they get on the right side and don't kill too many people. Okay. When women do acquire money, and this is going to come up in Leigh's talk too, it has been proved that they tend to spend it on food and healthcare for their kids. So they're not buying extra husbands. No, they spend it on their children. So that also, if they acquire money, they actually have more status in the family. So their husband is less likely to beat them up because that would stop them from earning money. So that always helps. Kinship countries outnumber democracies 2-1. The USA, what they did is they had this list of 176 countries and they gave them all a score between 0 and 16. 16 is you are really in this kinship thing. This is pretty sad. 0, there's no real signs of it in the community. It's pretty good. The United States ranked 1. I got a 1, which is pretty good. It's not a 0. And the reason it's not a 0 is domestic violence. Domestic violence is a problem here. They also looked at another, I hate saying that was a study, but there was. That's what the book's about, is research and studies. It said most people that are mass shooters were also abusers in the family. Again, there's that thing, if you're going to do something cruel to other people, you've tried it out at home first and seen that being powerful and being violent gets you what you want. And so that's a correlation, let's say, not necessarily a causation. And without democracy in families, you can't have democracy in governments. And so far the US government's been very bad at understanding this. So I think that's one thing, is it will help us, if you read the book, you must read the book. It will help you to understand why the world is like it is. And when you go to one of these countries, you can see why this government's not working and why they're corrupt. The thing about corrupt governments, is if you put someone from a kinship group in government to lead, what's he going to do for the other kinship groups? He's not going to be very good to them. All the resources will go to his kinship group. So the groups and the families have to be fixed first before the governments can be effective. And that's why if you want national security in a country, you have to all be on the same team. You have to be fair with everybody. You have to have the rule of law coming from the government rather than coming up from the kinship groups. Like you see groups who are pushing for Sharia law in some countries. The kinship groups can't make the law if you want a stable government. The government has to make the law. Okay. That'll do. Okay. It really helped. I hope you read it. It's good. And it's heavy duty, sorry. Skip with the bits you don't like.
Oh. See you later. We're going to do that at the very end. Well, Eric's switching out my computer here for my PowerPoint, which does have bullet points, Heather. Sorry about that. So I think, one of the things the author in the book talks about is how that connection between women's rights and how that country functions and whether they're willing to accept democracy is just, this study is completely ignored, right? Because it has to do with women. It's not, how can that have national security implications? But it does. In these countries that are deeply entrenched in this syndrome, the author calls it, they're much more likely to have, climate change disasters, war, famine, all of those things that, we as an ethical society want to bring an end to. So, you're left with the question then, if the change needs to come from within, how do we help? How do we help these women and how do we help these countries? And, I think the first politician, certainly the first male politician I heard talk about the importance of women's human rights and that connection to our global justice and security is Jimmy Carter. I don't know, he started talking about it in connection, obviously, with the Carter Center. And he said, this is it, this is the issue. This is the thing that everything else cascades from, is making sure girls are empowered through education and control over their lives. So at Ethical Society Mid-Rivers, we've been working on this issue since 2011 through Kiva loans, microlending throughout the world. You can switch to the, actually we're gonna go to the YouTube. There's about a 3-minute YouTube we're gonna watch about the Kiva founders. Jessica Flannery and her husband were newlyweds in East Africa when they developed the idea for Kiva loans. Inspired by
thing.
Yeah, I'm almost ready.
Okay.
Inspired by Nobel Peace Prize winner Professor Mohammed Yusuf. He's the founder of Grameen Bank, which means village bank from Bangladesh. Super cool. So in the late 70s, he had traveled I think he was a professor in the United States in Tennessee, and he'd gone back to his home country, Bangladesh, to try to answer the question of how we break the cycle of poverty, right? Which is, of course, connected to all the issues we've been talking about. when he was visiting with some women in Yabra, Bangladesh, he found that they were making baskets from bamboo, and in order to be able to get the material to do that, they would have to get loans from the local loan shark, right? And so all the profits from the baskets they made went back to the loan shark and then some. Professor Jonas was just appalled by that and immediately took out $27 from his pocket and gave it to 42 members of that village to get them out of debt. That experiment proved so successful that then he decided he needed to approach local banks and see if he could get them to fund all of these folks in the villages who were in debt, were not turning profits on their craft. All of the traditional banks he talked to said, no, we don't think the poor are credit worthy. So he worked and finally found a bank that would make these loans to individuals with him as the guarantor. And about 5 years later, the project had been so successful that he was able to start a bank, the Village Bank, the Grameen Bank, specializing in these individual loans to poor folk. And as recently, well, this is pretty dated statistic. I was having trouble finding, something current, but as of 2008, they had 7.5 million borrowers, many places around the world. 97% of those borrowers were women. They had over 2,500 branches, this bank did, and services in 82,000 villages, covering more than 97% of the villages in Bangladesh. They've lent over $7 billion to poor folks with a payment rate of nearly 100%. Pretty amazing. So, the Flannerys who started Kiva, this is just about 3 minutes of Jessica talking about just the different focus of Kiva. So, I think as people from a fortunate country, we have to be careful not to donate in a way that is that savior complex, we're coming in to fix this for you, or in a transactional way, I feel really guilty about this. Oh, I'll just put $25 on my debit card and then, whew, I don't have to think about this anymore. I've assuaged my guilt and compassion, right? I can move on. So she struggles with changing that paradigm and empowering people in the way that they want to live. So, thanks, Anne.
That really touched me. It was very humbling to see for the first time, to really understand that even if I could have taken a magic wand and fixed everything, I probably would have gotten a lot wrong, because the best way for people to change their lives is for them to have control and to do that in the way that they believe is best for them. So I saw that and it was very humbling. Anyway, another interesting thing happened while I was there. I never once was asked for a donation, which had kind of been my mode, right? There's poverty, you give money to help. No one asked me for a donation. In fact, no one wanted me to feel bad for them at all. If anything, they just wanted to be able to do more of what they were doing already and to build on their own capabilities. So what I did hear once in a while was that people wanted a loan. I thought that sounded very reasonable and really exciting. And by the way, I was a philosophy and poetry major in school, so I didn't know the difference between profit and revenue when I went to East Africa. I just got this impression that the money would work, and I started, my introduction to business was in these $100 little infusions of capital, and I learned about profit and revenue, about leverage, all sorts of things from farmers, from seamstresses, from goat herders. So this idea that these new stories of business and of hope might be shared with my friends and family, and through that maybe we could get some of the money that they needed to be able to continue their businesses and as loans, that's this little idea that turned into Kiva. A few months later I went back to Uganda with a digital camera and a basic website that my partner Matthew and I had kind of built, and took pictures of 7 of my new friends, posted their stories, these stories of entrepreneurship, up on the website, spammed friends and family and said, we think this is legal, haven't heard back yet from the SEC on all the details, but what do you say? Do you want to help participate in this? Provide the money that they need? The money came in basically overnight. We sent it over to Uganda, and over the next 6 months, a beautiful thing happened. The entrepreneurs received the money, they were paid, and their businesses, in fact, grew, and they were able to support themselves and change the trajectory of their lives. In October of 2005, after those first 7 loans were repaid, Matt and I took the word beta off of the site. We said, our little experiment has been a success, let's start for real. That was our official launch. And in that first year, October 2005 through 2006, Kiva facilitated $500,000 in loans. The second year, it was a total of $15 million. The third year, the total was up to around 40. The fourth year, we were just short of 100. And today, less than 5 years in, Kiva's facilitated more than $150 million in little $25 bits from lenders and entrepreneurs, more than 1 million of those collectively in 200 countries. So that's where Kiva is today, just to bring you right up to the present. And while those numbers and those statistics are really fun to talk about and they're interesting, to me, Kiva's really about stories.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal.
Oh, you got a little ad there. So that was the start in 2005. I remember hearing about Kiva in about 2010 when Bill Clinton and Oprah Winfrey started promoting it. And about that same time, well, I'll get onto that in a second. I skipped ahead in my mind. But the point of Kiva, right, is that this is reaching people who are unbanked. There's 1 billion people in the world that are unbanked. They don't have access to getting loans, right? Either they're too remote, there aren't any banks that are willing to, loan to folks that they might consider credit-worthy, right? Like Dr. Jonas had run into. So that is the niche they serve. Over 740 million women fall into that access to banks, unbanked number. And Kiva's loans overall, and this tracks with the money that the Ethical Society has been loaning, is 80% of those go to women. So you can, sorry, I keep forgetting. Yeah, so you heard that was an older TED Talk with Jessica Flannery. At this point, this is the 2024 numbers. 5 million people have been reached through a loan. So, and I think these other statistics play into what Heather was talking about, right? 85% report an increase in confidence, which could be a game changer. And 91% quality of life improved, which is pretty amazing. One of the things I think is probably the most earth-shattering idea with Kiva is that their repayment percent is almost 100%, 96.4. That's, there's no bank around that would ever report that kind of number. Pretty amazing. Now, just from our account, I did see a little drop in that during COVID, which is not surprising, right? If you had a business that, sold fruits and vegetables, some of those things, may have been impacted by, foot traffic decrease and that sort of thing. So we did see a little bit of more defaults during that time, but still that number is still holding strong because that's a 2024 number. So, yeah. So you heard Flannery talk a little bit about why loans and not just donations, right? That's huge, in preserving dignity. The other piece of that is that we're not giving money for a specific thing. Oh, here you go, we want you to educate your children, right? They're initiating this. They're going to spend that money in the way that they think will bring their family up, right? Which is important. It's very much in keeping with the beliefs of the Ethical Society. Like, we don't treat people the way we want to be treated. We treat them the way they want to be treated, right? So this is very much in keeping with that. So here's all the locations that Kiva is currently operating. And they make their biggest impact by using lending partners. And these are the organizations that are on the ground, right? Kiva is, can't be everywhere effectively. So these groups might be nonprofits, microfinance institutions, schools, NGOs, social enterprises. And the things they do is screen the borrowers. Pretty solid methodology with their processes. Obviously if you're getting 100%, near 100% repayment, you don't have a lot of shady characters there. So they will post that loan to Kiva. They front the money. Most of these lending organizations will front the money because when people come and ask, they're not saying, oh yeah, I might need money in 6 months for my business. They need it now, right? So these lending partners will give that money out. Then they post it on Kiva, we fund it, and then that partner organization then goes and funds the next project. So that's how that works. They're on the ground, they'll collect the repayments. They also provide some other great services, right? So literacy education, business, acumen. They're sometimes working on any kind of, healthcare issues, social issues. They're really tackling any issue that lender or that borrower might have, which is pretty amazing. This is an example of one of the partner groups on the ground, ODEF. So they're in Honduras. They focus on funding women, and they focus on sustainable businesses and processes, which I think is pretty amazing. Pretty good group. So as far as how this works, these are the steps basically that a borrower would go through, right? So they apply for this loan with that lending partner. Sometimes it's Kiva. In the United States, I think Kiva does their own, right? But because we do have some borrowers in the United States. So they disperse the loan, as I mentioned. Step 3. So we contribute, the loan's funded, they've already gotten their money, right? But we send it to the borrower or to the lending partner. We get repaid and then we repeat the cycle. So this is the genesis of why Esmr is participating in Kiva. In 2011, we lost a member. And we've been managing this account ever since. So a pretty modest initial memorial donation, and we've been managing it since then. And we've given out 122 loans. So the initial startup money, there was a little bit added a couple other times throughout, but about $345. And we've loaned $3,000 worth of $25 individual loans. Pretty amazing. And you can see that impact here. Exactly $3K. The kids and I the older Sikh kids and I just loaned last week a $25 loan. And we'll do one at the end of today. So we've got another $25 that's back that we can choose someone real quick to donate to. Okay.
Wow.
So our little account, we've loaned to 64 out of the 79 countries that Kiva represents. Give you a second just to look at pretty diverse group. Most of those folks would be towards the larger part of the scale that Heather was talking about.
So, and these are some of the purposes, right, by, and a graph that makes it a little easier to see. Food, retail, agriculture, education being the top few. 11 out of the 15 different purposes. You know, and keep in mind, the kids have been managing this. So they've chosen nearly every one of these loans over the years. Our statistic is exactly matching that of the national KIBA numbers. We also, as an individual lender, you can join groups with KIBA, and we've done that. We've joined the atheist, agnostic, skeptic, free thinkers, secular humanist, and non-religious group. Whew. We need an acronym for that. Right? And, you know, everybody's trying to figure it out. Okay. We're going to mix the vowels up, I think, to make sense of it. They weren't running like a competition right now, but anytime I've looked in the past when they've done that and say, okay, groups, in the next, week or whatever, who can lend out the most money, we're always on top. Always on top. Yep. Always on top. Yep.
It's that free thinker part.
So this is a story of one of the loans that we recently made. Shinoza's story. So she's the mother of 3. She's in Tajikistan. She sells shoes. Most of her customers are also women. She got a loan, $1,200, almost $1,300. 25 of those dollars were from us to expand her business. And she has repaid us completely. And somewhat recently sent an update that her business has grown. She was able to buy seasonal shoes and increase her family's security. A lot of the women report that, they were able to send their kids to school and all of those things because of that financial security that they were getting. So I'm going to now take over Eric's spot, and we're going to make a loan real quick.
All right. Okay. Here it is. So when you get on here, you have several different ways to figure out. Oh, I gotta turn it on. Oh, you gotta turn it on. Okay.
Is it on? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. There's several ways that you can go about choosing a loan. But it's loading here real quick. So we can, they give you some options right at the top. But then the other thing you can do is you can do your filter, right? So if we do women, we can choose the category.
We were low on education.
We were a little, and then also look, there's an LGBTQ.
Oh, so there was a non-binary choice too on gender.
Oh, really?
Huh.
Decisions.
Look at this. These folks are in Tennessee.
Oh.
So you get a little, I just wanted you to see what this looks like, right? You can kind of tailor this
How we doing?
based on your diversity strategist and business owner.
Can you read it aloud?
Yeah. As a diversity strategist and business owner, I'm passionate about helping underrepresented entrepreneurs succeed, inspired by my own journey navigating challenges as a Black woman in business. My drive comes from seeing the impact my work has on others, creating spaces for growth, representation, and success fuels my commitment to my business and community. So let's see what she's planning to do about it. let's see. Business dedicated to helping organizations create inclusive, equitable spaces through diversity, equity. Seems very timely, doesn't it? They provide customized DEIA strategies, engaging training sessions, coaching, fostering meaningful change in workplaces. Empower minority and women-owned businesses through workplaces like Certify Her, I've not heard of that, where we guide them through the certification process to unlock growth opportunities.
Please.
So let's see.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm gonna ask, what does that A stand for? DEIA?
Let's,
Accessibility.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I didn't
thank
know.
you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
So, pretty amazing. Are we all in on this one?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Let's
Who's in?
do it. That was easier. That was easier than I thought it was going to be, guys. I thought we might have trouble narrowing down. Okay, so they.
We're all anarchists at heart.
I normally do about $1 to Kiva on top of the just the 25 to the individual. All right, and then we complete the order.
Oh, how easy was that?
I know, right?
And anybody can just go to kiva.org and start your own private account.
Absolutely. And you also can pass along money to Eric, our treasurer, and if you tell him it's for Kiva, then we'll add it to our total for the
Well,
organization.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I think, do we have maybe a couple minutes for questions? Maybe not, because we probably want to get to.
That was very informative,
Lunch.
I must say.
Thank you, Heather. What do you, Bill? You want to close it out, or you want to do? I don't know if there's any
Connections?